This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, a weekly vlog series I do where I talk about limited Magic, usually the limited format we're playing right now, and right now we're in the early stages of Crimson Vow Limited. Because we're in these early stages, I wanted to talk about some of the overperformers in the set, cards that, I had certain expectations of and they've exceeded them. So I'm going to talk about a few cards that I think are overperformers. And then we'll, of course, do a crack a pack. I'll talk about the cards in the pack, which one I would take. So, yeah, the overperformers I'm going to talk about are all commons and uncommons. This format, I think, kind of the consensus at this point is that it's a Prince format as opposed to a Pauper format. A Prince format is one where the rares are inordinately strong on average. I mean, rares are always strong, right? But this set, I give out more bomb grades than I ever have in my set review. And having played the format a significant amount now, I think there are some cards, more cards that are bombs than even I gave bomb grades to. So it's true, rares and mythics can dictate a lot of how you do in this format, which is not a great thing for limited, generally speaking. However, commons and uncommons do still really matter. You can still do well with a deck of only commons and uncommons. Bombs are nice, of course, but there are cards, good commons and uncommons in the set that are very important. And I want to talk about, maybe not all of these are very important exactly, but they're all cards that are doing better than they kind of look like they would at face value. The first of these to talk about is Blood Petal Celebrant. So, I thought this was going to be a nice aggro card for the format. I thought it was going to be one of Red's better commons, a 2-mana 2/1 that has first strike when it's attacking. Like, just that card is usually a playable limited card. But in general, Blood has been a little bit better than I expected. I thought it would be nice for filtering mana. I knew there were payoffs, but it still sort of exceeded my expectations sort of collectively. Blood, there's just enough stuff to do with Blood that having Blood is a little bit better than I expected. And so the fact that this is such a good attacker early, and then, your opponent, once they can block it or whatever, they have to give you a blood token, which is some nice upside. Also, obviously pairs well with tricks and equipment and things like that because of first strike when it's attacking. So it's been kind of a premier 2-drop for red decks, especially black-red decks, where you can get the most mileage out of the creature type and the blood. The next common I want to look at, also one that produces blood, and that is Gluttonous Guest. So, in my set review, I said this card's really interesting because it works well in multiple decks. There's a life gain deck in black-white. There is a blood deck, well, food for vampires, but a blood deck for black-red, and so it makes the blood, it gains you life, and it has high toughness for the black-green deck too, which I think matters less than the first two, but it matters some. And in general, I've been more impressed with this than I expected. I've ended up in enough black-red decks with sort of a life gain sub-theme, and this card is usually key in sort of making that happen because sacking blood gains you life, and this makes it easier for various things to happen. There just are enough life gain payoffs in black that you end up playing that this has been better than I expected. And, the blood itself is just better than I expected, too, in general. So, yeah, this has ended up being, like I thought it was going to be a key common that was the glue that sort of held decks together. And it has been, but it's even exceeded my expectations from that point. The next, this one's an uncommon I want to look at, and it's Foreboding Statue. So this is one I gave a pretty high grade to. I thought it was going to be a great uncommon, and it is, but it's been even better than I expected. Part of it has to do with this format not having a ton of fixing outside of green, and also being a Prince format. And so when those two things sort of combine, you are more inclined to splash things, because the rares are so powerful that finding a way to play them is important. And so a card like this, and makes it easier for you to splash powerful rares and mythics, and it's just a good card in general. Like, that part, obviously I expected. I knew it was going to be good at ramping, good at fixing, and not that hard to transform, and it really isn't. And once it transforms, it's a pretty real creature. And overall, this is a card that in a lot of packs I would first pick. You're going to play it in basically every deck. It's maybe a little less good in a really aggressive red-white deck, but you'd probably still play it there. And yeah, so it's been a very good card. One of the best uncommons. It's on the short list as well for best uncommon in the set, I think. And being colorless helps because you'll play it in all your decks, and that's a nice feeling to have when you pick a card. Next, let's look at Traveling Minister. Of all the cards on this list, this is the one that I underrated the most. Already, at least that's how I feel now. Things can shift and change. We're in the early part of a format, but I think I gave it a D plus in my set review, and it's like a C. It's not an incredible card, but it's another card kind of like the Gluttonous Guest that helps out multiple archetypes. And this is something I noted in my set review. The idea it helps you with training, which is the green-white thing, and yeah, it's a repeatable source of life gain. But I just sort of felt the sorcery speed part of it was really a bummer. And I think, obviously that makes this card worse than it would otherwise be. But I think I put a little bit too much weight on that already in this format. This being a repeatable source of life gain really does matter. There are good repeatable life gain payoffs, like the thing that makes blood tokens, gaining extra life to transform your creature. The creature that gains you life when something dies, and if you gain 3 life, it transforms. There's just so many life gain things that if you combine it with this, you get some serious value. There's just nice life gain payoffs. The life gain deck's legit in this format. Obviously enough. Markov Purifier, the Signpost Uncommon, combines great with it. The training part matters too. And even if training doesn't matter, there are enough board states I've had in this format where just tapping this thing and giving +1/+0 to a thing suddenly makes you able to attack. It combines with Blood Petal Celebrant really well if you're in an aggro deck too, because now it can have 3 power when it's attacking and stuff like that. The next card I want to look at is Pack Song Pup. This thing, I thought it was going to be a good uncommon. I said in my set review, this is something that werewolves could have used in the last set, and that has pretty much proven to be true, but it's been even better than I expected. It is really a powerful card that really starts to snowball. If you get 2 of these in play, like turn 2, one, turn 3, another one, I haven't done it myself, but I've had it happen to me, unfortunately, and that is very difficult to beat as a start. Like, the creatures just get huge, you gain a little life when they die too, so you get the value back. It's really, the werewolf deck is the most tribal of all the color pairs in the format. It's, all of the allied color pairs all sort of care about tribes, but red-green is the one that really cares about them the most. There's the most cards that say, if you have a wolf or a werewolf, something happens. What happens here is good. They quickly become large. They quickly become a problem for your opponent. They just grow, all game long. You can also play a turn 1 wolf and then play this, which is also a pretty gross start. And those aren't, those are starts that are just going to happen with commons and uncommons. So it's been even better than I expected. I feel reasonably good about first picking one in a weaker pack. That happens less in this format because there's so many rares and mythics that are better than all the uncommons and commons, but it still happens. It's a card you should take pretty highly, and it'll do a lot of work in your red-green decks especially. So yeah, those are some early overperformers. As I play the format more, I'll have more to talk about, in regard to overperformers, underperformers, all that kind of thing. Let's move now to our Crack-a-Pack, and as usual, we'll look at the pack, I'll tell you what I would pick, and we'll talk about each card in the pack, tell you how I'm thinking about it at this point in the format. All right, so here's our pack. Our first common is Binding Geist. This card's fine. It's a solid little card. A 3-mana 3/1's not great, but the fact it disturbs into an aura that actually does a thing, weakening an opposing creature. It's neither side of this card individually would be a very good card, right? A 3-mana 3/1 or a 2-mana aura that makes something get -2/-0. Neither of those are very good cards, but the two of them together are perfectly solid. Not something you want to take at all early, but it's a fine card. Belligerent Guest, this has been a nice little card. Like I said, all the blood things I've been a little happier with than I expected. This thing is, with Trample, it's almost always going to give you a blood token. And sometimes you put your opponent in a place where they have to choose between trading something they really don't want to, or just taking a straight up hit from the guest and giving you a blood token for free. And then if you can just keep attacking and getting more blood tokens, things can get a little out of hand. It's not something you want to take early, don't get me wrong, but it's been a solid card. Maybe a little bit of an overperformer even. Witch's Web, this is a trick. You basically never take tricks with your first pick ever. They're only good in really aggressive decks for the most part, and even in those decks, they're situational enough that they're not always great. Grisly Ritual is what we have next. You play one of these in a lot of your black decks, it kills a thing, gives you blood tokens. That's decent value. But it is expensive, and that makes it so it's not really premium removal. You don't want to take it early. Steelclad Spirit, this thing's been fine. It blocks early pretty well. If you're in a more controlling deck, like blue-red or some versions of blue-white or blue-green, it's a fine 2-drop to have, and you end up swinging with it a little more than I expected to be the case, because there's some decent auras in this format in addition to the Disturb stuff. But again, not really a card you want to take early. Right now, at this point, I guess Belligerent Guest would be my pick. Militia Rallier, the next common, it's a nice one. 3 mana, 3/3s, rumble pretty well in limited, and the fact it untaps itself or something else, a lot of the time it's untapping itself because it's often the biggest creature on your board, but it untaps a thing when it attacks, and sure, it can't attack alone, but especially if you're in red-white, that's not much of a problem. It's not bad in green-white either. It's good at training because it's bigger, but it's another card. I would take Belligerent Guest over it. Rural Recruit has been pretty nice. It's just 4 mana 1/1 that brings a 3/1 boar along for the ride that can train it. It's been good. Maybe good's too strong of a word, but it's been a solid playable for sure. It adds a lot to the board. The 2 bodies can often help you stabilize. I think I'd still take Belligerent Guest over it at this point. Next up, it's Reckless Impulse. This has been a nice little draw spell for red decks. It's nice to have a one of, especially for the later part of the game. It is a little awkward because a lot of red decks want to be aggressive, and having this in the really early game is kind of annoying. But, especially in blue-red and more in slower red decks, it's especially a nice card to have. I think I'd still take Belligerent Guest over it. But now we're at Blood Petal Celebrant. We just saw this was, a card. It's one of Red's best commons, and I think it's the best common so far in this pack. This 2 mana 2/1, first strike when it attacks, give you a blood token when it dies. It just does a lot of work in the format, especially if you play it on turn 2, but it's relevant really all game long. It's what I would take right now. Next up, we've got Rot-Tide Gargantua. This guy's fine. A 5 mana 5/4 with Exploit that lets you edict a thing. A lot of the time you end up on board states where the edict doesn't do a lot. The times where it does a thing do make it feel really good. It feels like a really good card when you do that. Like if your opponent has 1 or 2 creatures, it can be a big deal. Or if you have, something to sacrifice that doesn't really cost you anything. But the times where that doesn't matter, it does feel pretty mediocre. And I'd still definitely take Blood Petal Celebrant over it. If we're looking at the commons in this pack, before we move into the uncommons, I guess I would say first I'd take the Celebrant, then Belligerent Guest, then Rural Recruit, and then Militia Rallier. I think those are the better commons. Binding Geist is a little further down, I think. So our first uncommon is Sawblade Slinger. I thought about putting this on my list of overperformers because it does have something to kill a little more often than I expected. People are often tapped out, and if they're tapped out, you can even take away a blood token with it. And while that's not incredible, blood decks are pretty legit, and being able to destroy a blood token matters, but it's still mostly a 4 mana 4/3, and yeah, it can kill things more often than not, but it's mostly just a solid playable. The times when it actually gets a real artifact or kills a zombie and survives, those times it feels great, so it has a really high ceiling, but it also has a pretty ugly floor. Skulking Killer is up next. This card's so weird. I don't know why it exists, really. I mean, the design's neat. The idea that it can only kill a thing if your opponent only has one thing is cool, but it's hard to make that happen consistently. I haven't seen it happen yet in the format. Granted, I haven't run the card at all, but I haven't had that many board states where I'm like, man, Skulking Killer would be a great draw here, especially because it can only kill the thing if it's, a 2/2 or less. So there's a lot of conditions that have to be fulfilled to make this into like Flame Tongue Kavu, and those conditions are too much. It's mostly a card you don't want to play because 95% of the time it seems to be a 4 mana 4/2. So I'm still in Blood Petal Celebrant. Next up, we've got Wolfkin Outcast, and this is a pretty good card. It's another good Wolf-Werewolf payoff. You do have to end up in a deck with a significant number of wolves or werewolves to get the full mileage out of it. The Wolfkin Outcast side, if you can cast it on turn 4, is pretty beastly. And then once it transforms, it becomes a really powerful wolf and werewolf payoff. And I think I would take it over the Celebrant. It has a really high ceiling and a reasonable floor. The Celebrant slots into more red decks more effortlessly, but the Outcast just has such a high ceiling that I think I'd rather have it here out of the commons and uncommons. We do have a mythic rare, but unfortunately, this is a set that has lots of bomb rares and mythics. This isn't one of them. Chandra Dressed to Kill. She's not a bad card by any stretch. You'll play her in any red deck pretty much, but her abilities being really specific about red cards, like her +1 exile effect, you have to hit a red card or you just exiled the card and got nothing out of it other than a loyalty. Her other +1 ramping you a bit and doing 1 to your opponent is nice, but not that exciting, and especially in the later part of the game, it really has diminishing values. And her ultimate, too, cares too much about red stuff. You can whiff on it. So, if you play her on turn 3, she can definitely do some serious work, just sort of pinging and ramping you. But the later the game goes, the more useless she gets, and she's not a great planeswalker at all. I think I would take the Outcast and probably Blood Petal Celebrant over her, so I think she's the third best card in this pack. But yeah, I think we take the Outcast in the end here. I think that's what we pick. Again, it does want you to be in a werewolf deck to get the most mileage out of it, but that's not a huge ask, and it's, has a really high ceiling, as opposed to the Celebrant, which is just always pretty good. It's always a nice card. Wolfkin Outcast can be a card that takes over games, and obviously that's the kind of thing that you want with your first pick. All right, that does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to make sure that you are caught up on all my thoughts about this format, you can check out my set review. You should see the playlist for it on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.